John D. Rockefeller remains a haunting paradox in the annals of American history. As the pioneer billionaire globally, he was an industrial giant who relentlessly crushed his rivals. His Standard Oil machine dominated the globe through secretive deals and the quiet bribery of officials. He locked horns with Andrew Carnegie and confronted nation leaders during intense political struggles. His life is a case study in unchecked ambition, born in 1839 to a destitute family. Known as Devil Bill, his charismatic father favored training wild animals over raising his children. John's mother instilled a rigid faith and an iron work ethic in her young son. At age 10, John hunted wild turkeys to establish his earliest independent business venture. This venture taught him the power of reinvestment and independent financial accumulation. Their security collapsed during 1849 as Bill escaped following a humiliating public felony charge. John watched as his father committed bigamy under the alias of Dr. William Livingston. Only 10 years old, the youth took charge, directing domestic affairs with mature efficiency. He dropped out of school to provide for his siblings, sacrificing his own dreams. Seeking employment in Cleveland, John drafted a cold, systematic roster of prestigious trading firms. After weeks of mockery, he secured a bookkeeping role on Job Day in 1855. For many years he marked this date, treating it like a holy spiritual event. He once snuck into the safe just to touch a massive check and feel its weight. This initial employment permanently broke his ties to his father's unstable, fraudulent history. Despite his struggles, John began tithing 10% of his earnings to the church. As a depression hit, he perceived the financial ruin as an ideal opportunity to advance. He partnered with Maurice Clark to launch a produce firm trading in grain and meat. John developed an attitude that forced seasoned business leaders to show him total respect. He once bluffed banks into giving him loans by pretending to have massive investment capital. He hired a substitute soldier during the Civil War to escape military duty and continue trading. He balanced his fierce abolitionist beliefs against the reality of being a sole provider. By supplying the Union military forces, he quickly multiplied his enterprise's earnings fourfold. By 23, his massive profits signaled the birth of a true industrial titan. Prior to electrical power, global communities depended on high-priced oil harvested from whales. The discovery of oil in Pennsylvania changed everything, turning crude into a global miracle. As competitors took risks extracting oil, John concentrated on the crucial processing sector. He met Samuel Andrews, who knew how to turn volatile crude into stable kerosene. He regarded the oil plant as a secondary project until it eclipsed his agricultural commerce. He realized that controlling the processing of oil was the only path to power. Though Maurice Clark faltered under financial pressures, John projected an image of complete tranquility. He paid $72,000 to buy out Clark and take sole control. Operating the enterprise independently, he stood ready to alter the path of the future. While others cashed out in fear, John doubled down on his black gold gamble. He wedded Laura Spellman, whose deep devotion balanced his detached, calculating commercial instincts. They lived modestly, funneling every cent back into the ever-growing business machine. John renamed his enterprise Standard Oil, offering a reliable product during a highly volatile period. He partnered with Henry Flagler, whose iron willpower and religious discipline mirrored his own. Jointly, they embraced an aggressive strategy aimed at methodically wiping out every competitor. They recognized that a market glut was threatening to destroy prices for everyone. Rockefeller started arranging private, covert partnerships with the prominent railway executives. The secret deal became his hidden blade to bleed competitors dry in total silence. The Erie and New York Central Railways served as crucial lifelines for domestic trade. When the Pennsylvania Railroad bypassed Cleveland, John sensed a desperate opportunity to strike. He promised the Erie line a steady freight quantity in return for major rebates. By promising 60 carloads a day, he secured rates far below the market standard. Train companies grew dependent on the predictable schedule that Standard Oil's massive cargo offered. John's competitors paid full price, while he benefited from these clandestine, secret rebates. Benefiting from reduced expenses, he dropped retail prices far below what competitors could endure. It was a math of ruin. Every sale pushed his competitors closer to bankruptcy. Odd. Standard Oil had transitioned from a mere corporation into an aggressive force swallowing its market. For a brief, flickering moment, the Rockefeller family tasted a shadow of stability. As a young adolescent, John contributed small weekly sums to the household budget, a modest offering that secured brief relief. But in that house, peace was always a fragile glass ornament waiting for Devil Bill to shatter it. This rupture occurred during 1849, arriving with an overwhelming public controversy that could easily have ruined typical households. William Rockefeller was accused of a violent sexual assault, a crime that turned the town against them in a heartbeat. The intense community shame destroyed their reputation, necessitating a hurried, secret flight in the middle of the night. But the betrayal went deeper into the very marrow of their lives. As John eventually discovered, his father was not merely traveling, but was living a secret second life. Bill had adopted the alias Dr. William Livingston, weaving a web of bigamy that saw him marry another woman while John's mother struggled to put bread on the table. More than a simple deception, this situation completely stripped away their remaining self-respect. At just 10 years old, the weight of the world shifted onto John's narrow shoulders. Filling the void created by his absent father, the boy assumed household leadership long before he became an adult. He managed the family's logistics with a cold, terrifying efficiency, even issuing microloans to neighbors. As his peers played outside, John spent his time computing interest percentages and evaluating the financial reliability of adults. He was a child forced into the skin of a banker, learning early that in a world of predators, you either hold the ledger or you are written out of it. Eventually, they relocated to Cleveland, Ohio, an urban center thriving with the dynamic vitality of a developing country. Yes, it was here that John reached a crossroads that would define his entire existence. Although he excelled academically and was mere weeks from finishing school, his home lacked food, and his brothers and sisters needed nourishment. With a pregnant mother relying on him, John made the agonizing decision to kill his own dreams of college. Leaving school behind, he exchanged academic studies for a guide to Cleveland's premier business area, Arbus. He didn't just look for a job, he launched a systematic siege. John compiled a roster of top-tier financial houses and traders, undertaking his search with the same calculated strategy he would eventually employ to ruin giant corporations. For 6 grueling weeks, the Cleveland heat beat down on him as he walked from door to door. Prominent business leaders dismissed him outright, viewing him merely as a slender, teenage applicant in cheap attire and rejecting his services immediately. But John didn't know how to surrender. Viewing each denial as valuable feedback, he adjusted his strategy and strengthened his determination. He was enduring a gauntlet of mockery, yet his spine remained as straight as a ledger line. He understood that he required only a single positive response. That yes finally arrived on September 26, 1855, a date John would celebrate for the rest of his life. Entering the headquarters of Hewitt and Tuttle, he submitted his qualifications for review. It was his flawless, copperplate penmanship, the result of iron discipline, that became his passport into the world of commerce. Securing a position as an accountant, the impoverished youth began acquiring comprehensive knowledge of the entire commercial operation. John became obsessed with the nervous system of American trade. Rather than merely sorting files, he studied cargo records, calculated freight expenses, and uncovered hidden dynamics of wholesale trading. He was a sponge, soaking up the mechanics of how wealth moves from one hand to another. Shortly after, a dramatic event occurred that permanently drove his motivation. Late one evening, John found himself alone with the company's safe. Calmly, he reached forward to retrieve a bank draft for $4,000, a massive sum back then. He didn't want to steal it, he simply wanted to feel its weight. Lingering in the faint glow, he gripped the document tightly, sensing the tangible presence of genuine financial power. It was an epiphany that transcended money. It was a physical connection to the power he intended to command. John constructed a mental barrier to safeguard his long-term aspirations. Every morning, he looked into the mirror and repeated a mantra that sounded like a religious invocation: "I am bound to be rich." This was not a mere wish, but a direct order to himself. He lived on the barest essentials, counting every penny with a zealot's intensity. Collecting his initial $50 salary, which subsequently rose to $300 annually, he felt the heavy burdens of his childhood finally dissolving. This wasn't just a salary. It was his declaration of independence. He succeeded in entirely breaking the monetary connection with his father's unstable and corrupt history. He was no longer a victim of Devil Bill's whims or the shame of a con artist's reputation. As John D. Rockefeller, he established his life's path on a solid groundwork of rational thought. He had emerged from the wreckage of a broken home to become the master of his own fate. He stood prepared to transform local Cleveland commerce into an expansive enterprise that would dominate the globe. The boy who once tracked turkeys was now tracking the movement of a global empire. Beyond merely acquiring wealth, he purified his financial gains through his intense religious devotion. Even as a struggling clerk, he carved out exactly 10% of every thin dime for the Baptist Church, a ritual of tithing that made him feel like a junior partner with the Almighty himself. However, economic conditions deteriorated rapidly across the nation when the financial crisis of 1857 occurred. The recession was a bone-chilling frost that killed off the weak, forcing one of his firm's senior founders to flee the sinking ship in a panic. As other business owners despaired or turned heavily to alcohol, John entered the financial ruins with the sharp, calculating focus of a hunting predator. We saw this chaos not as a tragedy, but as a vast, empty stage waiting for a lead actor. He partnered with Maurice Clark, an individual possessing an analytical, scientific mind, but a highly hesitant and deeply risk-averse business disposition. Together, they forged Clark and Rockefeller, a firm dedicated to the raw essentials of frontier life: grain, pork, and salt. At just 20 years old, John adopted formal attire alongside a chilling demeanor of absolute, rigid self-control. He demanded to be addressed as Mr. Rockefeller, forcing industry veterans with grey beards and decades of experience to bow to his superior preparation. He mastered the art of mental leverage, orchestrating an ingenious monetary deception to guarantee his long-term success. When he needed a massive loan to scale his operations, he didn't beg for crumbs. He entered the financial institution with the calm, self-assured confidence of an investor who already possessed 10,000, utilizing this imaginary wealth to persuade legitimate lenders into granting him $5,000 in actual credit. Then the world caught fire. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 presented John with an ethical dilemma that would have compromised weaker individuals. He was a fierce abolitionist who hated the institution of slavery, but he was also the sole financial heartbeat for a family of 6. Using the dispassionate strategy of a chess player, he arranged a specific trade, paying $300 for a substitute to fight on his behalf. He stayed in Cleveland, turning the city's geography into a grinding, high-efficiency engine of Union logistics. While Union soldiers traveled to fight on the battlefields, Rockefeller profited by supplying their food rations. He exploited the hyperinflated food prices of wartime and secured massive military contracts that acted like high-octane fuel for his ledgers. By 1862, when he was only 23, his company generated an impressive $17,000 in net earnings. In an era defined by blood, dirt, and muskets, John D. Rockefeller had officially arrived as an industrial titan. However, John was already shifting his focus away from ordinary agricultural commerce toward a far more powerful industrial sector. He looked at the flickering, dim lamps of Cleveland and saw a world trapped in a prehistoric, expensive twilight. For generations, evening illumination remained a privilege of the wealthy, dependent on oil extracted from harvested whales. But the oceans were running dry, and the cost of light was becoming a crushing tax on the American soul. Subsequently, in 1859, Pennsylvania soils started yielding an abundance of heavy petroleum. The invention of the oil derrick transformed this curse of the earth into a miracle called black gold. A massive commercial boom erupted, attracting numerous speculators to the muddy terrain of Titusville. But while others grabbed shovels to dig for a lottery ticket, John looked for the nervous system of the entire industry. He encountered Samuel Andrews, an engineering expert who held a highly confidential chemical process. Andrews knew how to use sulfuric acid to scrub the volatile, explosive crude into a stable, brilliant liquid, kerosene. Rockefeller invested $4,000 into a modest refinery, at first regarding it as secondary, while his agriculture business remained the primary focus. But within a single year, the side venture didn't just grow, it roared like a beast. The petroleum industry rapidly overtook his food and livestock commerce, demonstrating that true wealth was rooted in energy rather than agriculture. John watched with a vulture's patience as the Pennsylvania oil fields turned into boom or bust ghost towns. Barrel costs fluctuated drastically from 10 cents up to $14, pushing investors to near insanity. He realized that drilling was a gambler's game, but refining was the role of the house. As he fully committed himself to a resource that numerous geologists assumed would soon be completely depleted. His partner, Maurice Clark, began to buckle and crack under the psychological weight of the market's instability. While Clark feared an imminent crash, Rockefeller recognized a moment of fate. When the tension between them reached a breaking point, John didn't waste time on arguments or sentiment. He merely wrote a check for $72,000, a massive payout, to acquire Clark's interest and secure his departure. At 26 years old, John D. Rockefeller stood alone at the helm of a rising empire. His identity as an ordinary food trader disappeared, replaced by his emergence as the premier global oil baron. He was ready to paint the globe in the color of Standard Oil. Picture an era in which nightfall represented not merely a phase of the day, but a sentence of total darkness for anyone lacking substantial wealth. In the mid-19th century, the human race was caught in a desperate pre-electric twilight where the only thing standing between a family and the void was the dying embers of whale fat. Society hunted the great whales of the ocean almost to the point of extinction, draining the seas simply to obtain a few brief hours of unsteady, costly illumination. Whale oil was a luxury of the elite, a scarce resource that smelled of slaughter and cost more than most working men earned in a week. Yet even as the oceans were depleted, the ground throughout Pennsylvania began yielding a dark, pungent petroleum that was destined to transform the history of our world. In 1859, the first oil derrick pierced the soil of Titusville, transforming what was once considered a curse of ground-seeping sludge into the miracle of black gold. Suddenly, a disorganized and muddy resource rush swept the region, attracting thousands of speculators hoping to find fortune with a single fortunate drill site. It was a frenzy of low-cost entry and high-reward dreams, a world of men with shovels and no plans, all chasing a lottery ticket written in grease. As these early prospectors struggled amidst the muddy petroleum fields, John D. Rockefeller observed the chaos from Cleveland, waiting with the patient focus of a predatory bird. He didn't care about the gamble of drilling. He cared about the nervous system of the entire industry, the processing. Then came Samuel Andrews, a skilled innovator who approached John with a highly confidential chemical refining process. Andrews understood the dark art of sulfuric purification, a method of using acid to scrub volatile, explosive crude into a stable, brilliant liquid called kerosene. Recognizing the brilliant chemical potential, Rockefeller mitigated his risks by investing $4,000 into a minor refinery as a simple secondary business. At first, the produce empire of grain and meat remained his priority, a fortress of stability against the wild fluctuations of the oil market. Rather than growing slowly, the oil enterprise expanded dramatically, surpassing his agricultural wholesale operations in just a single year. John watched the side hustle transform into a tidal wave, proving to his cold, calculating mind that the real power of the future lay in energy. He executed a critical transition, choosing to leave behind his stable agricultural business to commit entirely to a resource that numerous analysts predicted would soon disappear. The Pennsylvania oil fields had become a nightmare cycle of boom or bust ghost towns, places where men became millionaires on Tuesday and paupers by Friday. Rockefeller weathered these extreme market fluctuations with immense resolve, observing calmly as oil prices shifted dramatically between 10 cents and $14 per barrel. To his competitors, this volatility was a reason to scream and panic. To John, it was a mathematical proof that the drillers were all fools. He understood that ultimate control in this industry belonged not to the prospectors finding the oil, but to whoever managed its processing and transportation. Drilling was a gambler's addiction, but refining was the role of the house, and John D. Rockefeller always intended to be the house. Nonetheless, the mental strain of these unpredictable market swings started to break down his partner, Maurice Clark. Clark was a man of the old world, a merchant who couldn't sleep at night while the black gold market threatened to collapse under its own weight. While Clark anticipated a devastating market collapse that would ruin them, Rockefeller recognized an ideal chance to centralize control while everyone else was panicked. The tension between the two partners reached a breaking point a silent war of nerves that played out in the dim light of their Cleveland office. Rockefeller avoided making emotional arguments or appealing to their past experiences working together. Instead, he maintained a mask of absolute, terrifying calm, waiting for the moment Clark's fear outweighed his greed. At only 26, John managed a critical separation, setting up a competitive bidding war to control the enterprise's future. He stood his ground as the price climbed, eventually producing a check for $72,500 to buy out Clark's share. This represented a massive financial risk for a young entrepreneur in 1865, a bold decision that put his entire personal net worth on the line. As Clark walked away with his money and his safety, John D. Rockefeller stood alone at the helm of a rising empire. The modest agricultural merchant was now gone, and in his place emerged the world's premier oil baron, an individual who treated corporate commerce as a sacred mission. He was no longer just a participant in the market. He was the architect of a new world order under the banner of Standard Oil. And he successfully navigated the hardships of poverty and the unstable oil rush to gain absolute control over his own destiny. The boy who once tracked wild turkeys in the woods was now tracking the movement of global energy, poised to change the course of human history forever. Independent at last, he observed a society still dependent on dim illumination and made plans to supply light on his own terms. This wasn't just a business success. It was the tipping point where ambition became an unstoppable force of nature. Rockefeller understood that in a highly competitive environment, one could only find security by becoming the most dominant force. His journey into the oil business was complete, but his war for total dominance was only just beginning. The age of industrial giants had commenced, ensuring that society would be altered forever. While Maurice Clark scurried away with his payout, terrified of a market collapse, John Rockefeller stood alone in the silence of his office and doubled down on the ultimate gamble. As he risked his whole fortune on the conviction that petroleum would become the driving force of modern society. This wasn't just confidence. It was a religious conviction that his job day destiny was being fulfilled by the hand of Almighty. Right on cue, the Pennsylvania landscape yielded immense new oil reserves, justifying his calculated determination while leaving his former partner forgotten by history. To provide a bedrock for this empire, John married Laura Spelman, a woman whose shared devotion to Baptist piety and extreme frugality made her his perfect tactical anchor. He maintained a deeply disciplined, simple lifestyle, rejecting luxury homes to guarantee that every extra dollar could be reinvested into his company. Even as a multi-millionaire, John counted the calories and the cents, viewing waste as a sin against both God and the ledger. The conclusion of the Civil War offered no pause, serving instead as the launchpad for a massive commercial expansion. John looked at the chaos of a market filled with volatile kerosene that exploded in family homes and saw a brilliant psychological opening. By branding his business Standard Oil, he guaranteed a level of reliability and quality that made a volatile substance a safe domestic product. He wasn't content with just lighting Cleveland. He aggressively targeted the vast, dark streets of Europe with a second massive refinery. Next appeared the associate who would assist him in transforming the global energy landscape, Henry Flagler. Flagler was a human razor, a man whose iron willpower and religious discipline mirrored John's with terrifying, machine-like precision. Their collaboration was not rooted in personal affection, but in the rational strategy required to achieve industrial dominance. Together, they adopted a philosophy of total war, moving beyond mere competition toward the systematic surgical elimination of every rival in the field. They realized that overproduction was crippling the sector, as an excess of supply threatened to collapse market prices for everyone. While others wept over their falling profits, Rockefeller and Flagler went underground to the boardrooms of the great railroad titans. They arranged confidential, private agreements with the Erie and New York Central railroads, obtaining hidden freight discounts that remained completely out of public view. Or, the secret deal was born, a hidden blade of exclusive discounts that allowed Standard Oil to ship for pennies, while rivals paid the full, crushing market rate. Railways grew highly dependent on the predictable volume of Standard's shipments, essentially subordinating themselves to Rockefeller's broader corporate plans. This wasn't just a business advantage. It was a math of ruin that bled his unsuspecting competitors dry before they even realized the war had begun. Standard Oil had evolved beyond a basic business entity, transforming into an aggressive monopoly, swallowing the entire sector from within. By the time his enemies understood that the very tracks beneath their feet were working against them, John already held the keys to the kingdom. outcome, he converted the disorganization of the oil rush into a highly organized, efficient system geared toward complete global market control. The era of the small merchant was dead, and the age of the corporate titan had arrived. John D. Rockefeller embodied two conflicting identities: a deeply religious benefactor and a ruthless business executive who treated commerce as a battleground. He was the world's first billionaire, a titan who built a throne on the bones of his rivals and the quiet bribery of the law. Yet his history started in the poverty of 1839, raised by a family where starvation was an ever-present threat. His father, Devil Bill, was a traveling con artist who tamed bears and abandoned his children for months to live a double life. While his dad peddled fraudulent remedies to gullible buyers, a young John hunted turkeys to start his initial business venture. He learned early that in a world of predators, you either own the cage or you become the prey. This poultry venture was more than a simple chore. It fostered a commercial mindset driven by the desire for self-made success. Stability was a fragile lie that shattered in 1849 when a public scandal forced the family into a panicked midnight escape. John witnessed his father marry illegally using a false name, abandoning a 10-year-old to manage the household and extend credit to adults. He sacrificed his education to feed his siblings, launching a systematic siege on Cleveland's business elite with a cold target list. Following weeks of rejection, September 26, 1855, became Job Day, a revered occasion when his neat handwriting secured his entry into business. He once snuck into a safe just to touch a $4,000 check, feeling the physical weight of the power he craved. "I am destined to succeed," he declared privately, a daily resolution that distanced him from his father's fraudulent way of life. John didn't just earn money. He tithed 10% to the church, making God his senior partner in every transaction. The financial crisis of 1857 did not discourage him. Rather, he viewed the turmoil as his perfect opportunity. He partnered with Maurice Clark to trade in the essentials of life: grain, meat, and the salt of the earth. Throughout the Civil War, John acted strategically, hiring a substitute soldier while focusing on supplying goods to the Union military. He exploited hyperinflated wartime prices, turning the blood of the battlefield into $17,000 of pure, cold profit. At age 23, the slender accountant had achieved major success. But his attention was turning toward a more powerful industry. He cultivated a persona of eerie maturity that compelled veterans twice his age to treat him with absolute, trembling deference. Prior to electrical lighting, people struggled with nightfall unless they could afford expensive oil obtained from ocean whales. The discovery of oil in Pennsylvania changed everything, but John saw the industrial gold rush as a fool's gamble. He understood that real dominance lay not with the drillers, but with whoever managed the critical refining and distribution network. He met Samuel Andrews, a chemist with the secret to turning volatile sludge into stable, brilliant kerosene through sulfuric purification. When his business partner Maurice Clark panicked during severe price fluctuations, John projected an attitude of perfect, unwavering composure. He produced $72,000 to buy Clark's silence and take sole control of the rising empire. The chaotic speculation period had ended, replaced by organized control, and Rockefeller determined to be the sole provider in the market. Standing alone at the helm, John didn't just invest. He doubled down on a religious conviction that oil was the Earth's black blood. He wedded Laura Spellman, an exceptionally thrifty woman who helped ground him amid a society focused on lavish spending. They lived like monks, funneling every spare cent back into the machine he rebranded as Standard Oil to promise safety to a terrified public. He identified an ideal ally in Henry Flagler, a relentless individual who fully supported his strategy of aggressive, unrestricted competition. Together, they moved beyond competition toward the surgical elimination of every rival who dared to breathe their air. Realizing that a severe market oversupply was threatening prices, they met secretly inside the offices of the major railroad executives. The era of the small merchant was over, replaced by a predator consuming an entire industry from the inside out. The Erie and New York Central railways served as America's vital transport pathways, and Rockefeller determined to control their operations. When the Pennsylvania Railroad tried to starve Cleveland, John sensed a desperation gap and struck a deal with the devil. He guaranteed 60 daily oil shipments to the Erie line in return for a massive, confidential freight discount. This was the secret rebate, a hidden blade that let Standard Oil ship for pennies while rivals paid the full market price. This destructive strategy succeeded. John reduced consumer prices to a level where his rivals exhausted their financial reserves trying to compete. He systematically harvested the bankruptcies of his enemies, turning a city marked for death into the global center of refining power. His enterprise ultimately monopolized the sector, demonstrating that in major business conflicts, the quietest tactics yield the most decisive results. In the lawless wasteland of the late 1800s, the line between a business genius and a corporate predator was drawn in thick black ink and heavier oil. Existing before antitrust regulations, this ruthless environment rendered the idea of fairness an illusion discussed only by bankrupt business owners who had already been crushed by the corporate machine. And John D. Rockefeller didn't just operate within this moral gray zone. He built a fortress there, treating legal loopholes as his private playground. As other operators struggled amidst the messy Pennsylvania oil wells, Standard Oil's expansive network grew stronger by absorbing the assets of weaker rivals. But even a titan like John faces the terrifying threat of a collapsing sky. By 1872, the entire market suffered from its overproduction, as an excessive petroleum supply reduced a once valuable resource to a cheap and unprofitable commodity. The price of a barrel plummeted to a sickening $2.40, a sound like a death rattle for the average American refiner. Rockefeller observed this crisis with absolute focus, noting that almost 90% of domestic refineries were losing money and heading toward bankruptcy. He realized with a chilling detachment that individual survival was a pathetic fantasy in a dying ecosystem. Rather than more reckless wildcatters, the industry required an organized, dispassionate authority to manage output and establish the rules of the market. As prices dropped another 25%, Rockefeller prepared to execute the most ambitious, cold-blooded heist in the history of American energy. Instead of simply participating in the market, he sought absolute control over the raw materials driving the entire supply chain. He reached out to his former bitter rival, Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad, burying the hatchet only so they could sharpen a much larger blade. Collectively, they organized a major cartel hidden behind an incredibly dull and bureaucratic title: the South Improvement Company. The SEC wasn't just a business entity. It was an unholy alliance, a secret cartel designed to bleed the industry dry in total, suffocating silence. John obtained an extraordinary 50% shipping rebate for each transported barrel, a discount his competitors could not possibly match. But the true masterpiece of his cruelty, the stroke of genius that still haunts economic history, was the drawback weapon. Through this unusual arrangement, a percentage of the transportation costs paid by his rivals was diverted straight into Rockefeller's own accounts. Every time a rival moved a gallon of oil, they were literally paying John to fund their own destruction. The rail systems ceased being mere transportation routes, acting instead as John's confidential information source and industrial spy network. They handed over his rivals' manifests, secret price lists, and customer registries with the mechanical indifference of a hanging judge. Utilizing this confidential intelligence, Rockefeller conducted a highly advanced strategy that anticipated modern commercial competition by decades. He would lower his kerosene prices just enough to starve a competitor into submission, knowing his own margins were safely cushioned by those clandestine rebates. This calculated, methodical strategy effectively transformed the open market system into a controlled environment for eliminating competition. So, being on the outside of this exclusive club wasn't just a disadvantage. It was a financial death sentence delivered with a quiet Baptist smile. John completed his plans for an absolute, unassailable monopoly, a structural system that gave him control over the source of illumination in American households. He wasn't just selling kerosene, he was selling the absolute end of competition. At the time of independence, local traders had passed, overtaken by a massive monopoly that absorbed the entire sector from within. Rockefeller stood at the center of his web, watching as the shadow of the Titan stretched from coast to coast, turning the world into his personal ledger. With the trap prepared and the mechanisms in place, the public was about to witness that within Rockefeller's domain, balanced or fair competition did not exist. In the lawless wasteland of the late 1800s, the line between a business genius and a corporate predator was drawn in thick, black ink and heavier oil. In an era prior to antitrust laws, this harsh environment rendered the idea of balanced competition a myth shared by ruined merchants who had been devastated by the system. And John D. Rockefeller didn't just operate within this moral gray zone. He built a fortress there, treating legal loopholes as his private playground. Even as rival drillers floundered in the messy Pennsylvania oil fields, Standard Oil's industrial network continued to expand rapidly by draining the resources of weaker enterprises. But even a titan like John faced the terrifying threat of a collapsing sky. to around 1872, the entire sector collapsed due to excessive production, as an overabundance of petroleum turned a valuable discovery into cheap, unprofitable excess. The price of a barrel plummeted to a sickening $2.40, a sound like a death rattle for the average American refiner. Rockefeller observed this economic devastation with absolute focus, calculating that nearly 90% of domestic oil processors were losing money and facing imminent ruin. He realized with a chilling detachment that individual survival was a pathetic fantasy in a dying ecosystem. Rather than more reckless wildcatters, the industry required an organized, dispassionate authority to manage output and establish the rules of the market. As prices dropped another 25%, Rockefeller prepared to execute the most ambitious, cold-blooded heist in the history of American energy. Instead of simply participating in the market, he sought absolute control over the raw materials driving the entire supply chain. He reached out to his former bitter rival, Tom Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad, burying the hatchet only so they could sharpen a much larger blade. Collectively, they organized a major cartel hidden behind an incredibly dull and bureaucratic title: the South Improvement Company. The SEC wasn't just a business entity. It was an unholy alliance, a secret cartel designed to bleed the industry dry in total, suffocating silence. John obtained an extraordinary 50% shipping rebate for each transported barrel, a discount his competitors could not possibly match. But the true masterpiece of his cruelty, the stroke of genius that still haunts economic history, was the drawback weapon. Through this unusual arrangement, a percentage of the transportation costs paid by his rivals was diverted straight into Rockefeller's own accounts. Every time a rival moved a gallon of oil, they were literally paying John to fund their own destruction. The rail systems ceased being mere transportation routes, acting instead as John's confidential information source and industrial spy network. They handed over his rivals' manifests, secret price lists, and customer registries with the mechanical indifference of a hanging judge. Utilizing this confidential intelligence, Rockefeller conducted a highly advanced strategy that anticipated modern commercial competition by decades. It was a systematic, mathematical execution that turned the concept of the free market into a corporate slaughterhouse. John completed his plans for an absolute, unassailable monopoly, a structural system that gave him control over the source of illumination in American households. Rockefeller operated under what he called the gospel of order, a messianic belief that he wasn't destroying competition, but saving a chaotic industry from its own suicidal overproduction. In his view, the petroleum oversupply represented an industrial disaster that severely devalued oil, risking the collapse of the country's energy sector. However, the quiet advance of his machine hit a wall when the leak of the century occurred, as newspapers exposed the secret railroad refiner cartel to a stunned public. Reports of shipping fees suddenly doubling triggered intense public outrage against monopolies, sparking chaotic demonstrations in the streets. Thousands of angry citizens took to the pavement in a wave of fury, targeting Standard Oil with open threats of arson, vandalism, and physical violence. Demonstrators engaged in sabotage on the tracks, intercepting Standard shipments and dismantling rail infrastructure to disrupt the cartel's transport network. As the ultimate countermove came from the oil producers themselves, who launched a total boycott, refusing to sell a single drop of crude to the alliance. Consequently, Rockefeller's extensive, modern refining facilities remained completely inactive and idle due to this organized opposition. Within 60 days, the South Improvement Company was forced into a humiliating public disbandment, marking the first major defeat for the rising titan. Despite public celebration over his difficulties, John remained entirely undisturbed, analyzing the crisis not as a defeat, but as a guide for strategic expansion. He weaponized the lingering paranoia of the secret deal, allowing rumors of hidden alliances to continue, terrifying his rivals into submission. Soon after, he launched the Cleveland Massacre, a swift, 6-week campaign aimed at purchasing or eliminating all 26 rival refiners locally. He used the psychology of the open ledger, inviting rivals into his office to view Standard's superior balance sheets and crushing profit margins. Using hard financial figures, he demonstrated to them that competition was impossible and independent survival was unrealistic. A panic-selling fever took hold as competitors surrendered their life's work for mere fractions of its value, bucking under the weight of orchestrated fear. John presented a stark choice: accept a minimal buyout and agree to leave the petroleum business permanently, or integrate your talents into Standard Oil. This wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a brain trust acquisition that transformed his former enemies into his most elite loyal lieutenants. Rockefeller finished this consolidation campaign not merely as a prosperous processor, but as the absolute leader of a worldwide energy monopoly. The boy who once tracked turkeys in the dirt had successfully built a cage for an entire industry, and he was finally ready to turn the key. While typical businessmen would rejoice at domestic success, Rockefeller was already preparing his strategy for global domination. He took the hollowed-out shells of the refineries he'd conquered in Cleveland and performed a cold, industrial resurrection. He adopted advanced processing techniques that dramatically reduced waste, rendering the methods of his rivals obsolete and amateurish. By 1873, he was pumping out 1 million barrels of kerosene a year, a volume that felt less like a business and more like a God-sized force of nature. Subsequently, on September 18th, a major economic crash occurred, widely remembered as Black Thursday. A brutal national recession ignited at the New York Stock Exchange, a financial winter so deep that it turned the American dream into a frozen, unburied corpse. Petroleum prices did not merely decline, they plummeted rapidly, bottoming out at an incredibly low 48 cents per barrel. In a twisted, cruel irony of the industrial age, the world's most potent energy source was suddenly worth less than a wooden bucket of clean drinking water. Yet, while others despaired over the crisis, John D. Rockefeller recognized an unprecedented buying opportunity. Come, while his rivals were hemorrhaging their life's blood and begging for mercy, Standard Oil sat on a mountain of cash and the most pristine credit in human history. Instead of waiting for rivals to fail naturally, he actively and systematically engineered their commercial ruin. He moved his gaze beyond the borders of Cleveland, targeting the desperate, bleeding refining hubs of Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and the strategic ports of New York. He initiated a quiet but highly effective strategy of blocking transport and logistics, completely disabling his competitors' business operations. Standard Oil began buying up every spare barrel and every single piece of refining machinery available on the open market. Whenever a rival managed to survive the financial downturn, they discovered that every shipping container in the region had already been purchased by Standard. John then leaned on his railroad partners to reserve every available cargo car for his own high-volume shipments for months on end. Competitors could only watch as their unsold oil remained idle on site, blocked by shipping restrictions they had no ability to overcome. John turned the railroads into a surgical weapon of war, pressuring rail lines to spike transport rates for specific enemies until their cash reserves vanished into thin air. This was highly methodical corporate spying. He exploited precise freight records to extend acquisition proposals at the exact moment a competitor's cash reserves ran dry. He bought world-class infrastructure for pennies on the dollar from desperate, broken owners who were facing total, unrecoverable ruin. Pittsburgh's self-sufficient refining industry was permanently shut down as Rockefeller systematically acquired half of local production. He then secured the Atlantic Gateway in New York, ensuring that every drop of oil destined for the lucrative European markets had to pass through his iron fingers first. However, his most brilliant maneuver was yet to unfold. A bold direction shift that would catch the cooperative railway companies completely off guard. John realized that even the Iron Horse was a parasitic middleman he no longer intended to tolerate. He launched his Quiet Pipeline initiative, installing a concealed grid of iron pipes stretching across the nation's countryside. These pipelines pumped crude oil directly from the earth to his refineries, stripping the railroads of their leverage and plummeting his overhead costs to near zero. His goal was a hidden, vast fuel transportation system that completely avoided the standard overground transit and workforce. As the nation finally crawled out of the 6-year recession, they didn't recognize the landscape they emerged into. The basic retailer had fully evolved into an industrial king, controlling a vast business that illuminated everyday life globally. Every drop of American oil was now forced to pay a silent, inescapable toll to the Standard Oil machine. Rockefeller recognized that to dominate the lighting market, he first had to monopolize the raw petroleum flowing underground. He was no longer just a participant in a market. He was the invisible hand of the market itself. The generation of industrial giants had emerged, built upon heavy rail networks, harsh labor conflicts, and valuable crude oil. He stood alone, watching a world that now moved only when he allowed it to breathe. By 1938, John D. Rockefeller had progressed far beyond simple entrepreneurship, operating as a highly influential, quiet ruler of industry. The American public began to visualize his massive empire as the octopus, a multi-tentacled beast wrapping its iron grip around the eastern seaboard. His individual fortune eventually equaled the state reserves of whole governments, even as everyday citizens grew to deeply resent his reputation. As the media of the late 1870s branded Standard Oil as the most cruel and pitiless monopoly to ever stain the history of commerce. Yet the oil magnate remained indifferent, directing his attention toward a serious shipping bottleneck that threatened to stall his corporate growth. He realized that the iron arteries of the railroads were no longer partners, but a parasitic drain on his divine mission. With a highly clever pipeline strategy, he started burying iron conduits deep in the earth to avoid using rail transport altogether. This wasn't just a technical upgrade. It was a death sentence for the railroad titans who relied on his heavy cargo for survival. Tom Scott, the determined leader of the Pennsylvania Railroad, saw this fatal risk and decided to mount an urgent retaliatory effort. Scott committed the ultimate sin in Rockefeller's eyes by building his own refineries to compete for the soul of the industry. John considered this corporate rivalry a personal act of treason, demanding an aggressive, uncompromising campaign to wipe out his opponent. He declared a campaign of corporate execution that would test the very limits of American social and economic stability. Rockefeller immediately canceled all shipping agreements with the Pennsylvania Railroad, leaving their extensive cargo stations completely empty and idle. He then orchestrated a systematic price asphyxiation, dropping kerosene costs to historic lows that no independent refiner could ever survive. Scott was compelled to operate his processing units at a devastating deficit, witnessing his career achievements quickly crumble away. John then engineered a secret, collusive pincer movement with the New York Central and Erie railroads to bury his remaining rival. Other lines offered him extremely cheap transport rates, forcing the Pennsylvania Railroad into a desperate cycle of rising liabilities. It was a math of ruin. Tom Scott was soon forced into a cycle where he was effectively paying customers to haul his freight. But strict cost-cutting by the rail companies soon provoked an angry, desperate response from their underpaid labor force. Scott was forced to gut his workforce and slash salaries by 20%, pushing his laborers past the breaking point of human endurance. The subsequent Great Railroad Strike of 1877 developed into the most explosive and frightening labor conflict in national history. Rockefeller's calculations had inadvertently sparked a fire that threatened to consume the very foundations of the American industrial dream. In the destructive Pittsburgh Inferno, hundreds of freight containers and dozens of engines burned, filling the atmosphere with thick smoke. Protesters turned their primal rage toward the machines of industry, and dozens of lives were lost in the smoke of the streets. Even the reserved, highly disciplined Rockefeller temporarily had doubts about the massive industrial chaos he initiated from his quiet office. But the outcome was never in doubt. The Goliath of the railroad industry eventually collapsed under the weight of the Titan. The Pennsylvania Railroad, previously an unmatched powerhouse of domestic industry, finally gave in to the constant demands of Rockefeller. Tom Scott's peace offering was a humiliating end to the era of railroad dominance over the movement of American goods. John Rockefeller came out of the crisis, dominating not only the oil industry, but also the roots of national commerce. He had built a cage for the giants, proving that the silent math of the predator always wins the war. When the massive labor strike finally ended, the nation's commercial environment had changed from an open market into a private corporate monopoly. Within the walls of the Standard Oil headquarters, a fascinating dichotomy of destruction was at play. Henry Flagler was an uncompromising strategist, operating with a fierce determination to systematically destroy every business competitor. But John Rockefeller was a creature of ice and calculation, preferring to swallow his enemies whole rather than leave their carcasses to rot. He aimed for more than mere success, seeking to reshape the disorganized sector into a highly structured monopoly he managed. The first order of business was the formal neutering of the railroad titans who had dared to defy him. Tom Scott, formerly the unchallenged leader of the Pennsylvania Railroad, had to accept an embarrassing compromise to keep operating. Rockefeller offered him a lifeline that felt more like a leash, guaranteeing 47% of Standard's shipping volume to his line. The remaining 53% was carefully allocated among the Erie, New York Central, and B&O lines. This wasn't an act of charity. It was a masterclass in industrial rebalancing. Dividing his shipments allowed John to prevent any individual rail line from ever gaining enough power to oppose his leadership. Then came the most sinister financial weapon ever forged in a boardroom, the 20-cent drawback. Utilizing confidential private agreements, John secured a percentage fee for every barrel of competitor oil transported across those railway tracks. It was a parasitic masterpiece. Even when his rivals moved their own product, they were unknowingly paying John to fund their own destruction. The former merchant had assumed complete authority, relegating the powerful railway companies to minor shipping divisions of Standard Oil. The Iron Horse was now merely a beast of burden for the Oil King. John transformed railway transport logs into a specialized surveillance network, systematically monitoring every cargo shipment, buyer, and competitive price offered by his business rivals. He knew his rivals' businesses better than they did themselves, allowing him to strike with surgical precision before they even saw the blade. Successively, the unaligned oil processing centers in Philadelphia, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh quickly dissolved under the immense competitive pressure. By 1880, John Rockefeller stood atop a 90% hegemony over the American energy supply. He established a corporate monopoly that made rival business operations not merely challenging, but entirely impossible to sustain. But this total victory came with a haunting human cost. The severe mental strain of his business collapse ultimately shattered Tom Scott's health, causing a fatal stroke and solitary demise. Scott's demise marked the end of the old-school Gilded Age pioneers, but it ignited a new, more dangerous fire. Andrew Carnegie, Scott's ambitious young student, observed his mentor decline and die under Rockefeller's intense corporate pressure, fostering a deep and bitter desire for revenge. Carnegie swore a blood oath against the man he called the Oil King, transforming his grief into a lifelong vendetta. Society was poised to witness a monumental conflict between industrial giants. The leader of oil confronting the pioneer of steel for international dominance. As the newspapers branded John the most notorious and feared sovereign in the nation, he simply withdrew into the shadows. As other wealthy executives constructed lavish, ornate estates, the monk of Manhattan adhered to strict economic self-discipline and quiet religious practices. He lived in a world of ledgers and prayer, proving that true power doesn't need a crown or a parade to command the earth. John Rockefeller stayed highly mysterious to the average citizen, quietly directing his international oil monopoly from a plain, quiet headquarters. He was fueled only by a drive for order and a belief that he was doing God's work by organizing the world's resources. Though he possessed unmatched personal fortune, he remained deeply mysterious, acting as an invisible force behind the growth of modern industry. The boy who once tracked turkeys in the dirt had finally built a cage for the entire world, and he was the only one with the key. Unchallenged in his success, he observed a country powered almost entirely by his petroleum, preparing for the next phase of his commercial campaign. By the mid-1880s, John D. Rockefeller stood atop a mountain of black gold, convinced that his empire was as eternal as the scriptures he read every morning. Meanwhile, inside a crowded, busy laboratory in New Jersey, Thomas Edison developed an electric light bulb that posed a severe threat, risking the total obsolescence of the kerosene lighting sector. The incandescent bulb wasn't just a clever gadget. It was an existential executioner, poised to make the world's most profitable commodity a historical footnote. Even as other Standard Oil executives panicked and rushed to liquidate their shares, John stayed completely unemotional, focusing his attention instead on a smelly and problematic new oil discovery located in Ohio. In 1885, a massive oil find in the north promised a surplus that would kill market prices, yet there was a chemical catch that sent every other investor running for their lives. This Ohio petroleum was highly problematic, containing such a high concentration of sulfur that it emitted a terrible odor and produced heavy black soot when burned inside standard home lamps. To the average oilman, this was worthless sludge that would destroy their reputation. To Rockefeller, it was the perfect stage for his most ambitious and cold-blooded gamble yet. Observed calmly as property values in Ohio dropped to record lows, then initiated a quiet, organized purchase of the land that other operators avoided as useless. John was no longer content with just being the world's refiner. He was pivoting toward a vertical manifesto that would redefine the very meaning of the word monopoly. He understood that lasting corporate power came from controlling every aspect of production, from the initial underground drilling to the final delivery at a buyer's residence. He wanted to cut out every middleman, every transport broker, and every independent supplier, treating them like parasites, draining the blood of his divine mission. Standard Oil acquired timberlands to harvest wood for manufacturing its own shipping containers, ensuring that no extra expenses were paid to outside suppliers. But the sulfur problem remained a molecular wall that threatened to turn his massive Ohio investment into a stinking financial tomb. Rather than hoping for luck, Rockefeller hired a specialized team of expert chemists to research a solution for refining the problematic, smelly petroleum. He poured tens of thousands into research that his peers deemed a reckless waste of capital, betting everything on the power of science to sanitize the Earth's mistakes. Once his chief scientist successfully removed the sulfur using a secret copper oxide technique, John secured a dominant international position in the production of highly refined, clean petroleum. He had turned a biohazard into a kingdom, positioning his machine to swallow the upcoming booms in Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma before the first derrick even touched the dirt. Just as electric lights started replacing kerosene, a major new market was created by the invention and popularization of internal combustion automobile engines. Gasoline, a volatile and dangerous byproduct that Standard Oil had once discarded into the Cuyahoga River as useless trash, was suddenly the high-octane blood of the 20th century. John observed as the rapid growth of the automotive market turned a petroleum byproduct into immense wealth, transforming a threatened business into a dominant global force. When the Panic of 1893 arrived like a financial scythe, it harvested over 600 banks and thousands of businesses, leaving the American dream in a state of total collapse. Nevertheless, within the strongholds of Standard Oil, corporate profits steadily grew, supported by such immense cash reserves that Rockefeller regularly functioned as the country's unofficial lender of last resort. He had transcended the volatility of the market to become the market itself, a shadow sovereign who thrived on the very chaos that broke the spirits of lesser men. The impoverished child who once hunted wild birds had transformed into the designer of a vast global energy network spanning the Earth. He stood at the threshold of the modern age, a man who had successfully transitioned from lighting the night to powering the very movement of the human race. This represented far more than commercial success, marking the rise of a lasting monopoly that treated competition as harmful and complete market control as essential. As the new century dawned, Rockefeller looked out over a nation that moved only when he allowed it to breathe, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying peace. And the industrial giant survived the challenges of electricity, railway collapses, and major economic downturns, demonstrating that the operator controlling essential resources inevitably dominates the market. By the early 1890s, John D. Rockefeller had successfully conquered the Earth's blood. but his private kingdom was quietly rotting from within. Although Standard Oil operated with extreme efficiency, John's individual financial ventures had accumulated into a vast collection of disastrous business losses. Outside the iron walls of his oil monopoly, the world's first billionaire was hemorrhaging cash into a series of poorly managed, sinking ventures. He was an industry leader trying to step back from active management. Yet he remained ensnared in complicated personal investment problems. To solve this, he made the most unconventional hire in the history of American business. Frederick Gates, a Baptist preacher with no formal training, but a preternatural instinct for efficiency. Gates combined deep religious devotion with the highly analytical, sharp perspective of a professional financial auditor. He began a process of industrial exorcism, purging the bad assets and transforming Rockefeller's chaotic holdings into a disciplined wealth multiplication engine. At this juncture, John Jr. joined the core management team, working alongside Gates to master intense deal-making and understand the massive public expectations of his family legacy. Together, this duo shifted the family's strategy from a desperate defense to a predatory global offense. Their objective exceeded simple cost-cutting. They sought to acquire control over the foundational assets of American industry. Their gaze eventually settled on the Mesabi mountain range in Minnesota, a 120-mile vein of destiny. This rugged region held the highest quality and most extensive reserves of iron ore ever found in North America. Rockefeller realized with a chilling clarity that while he owned the energy that moved the nation, he didn't yet own the bones of the nation itself. He acted with remarkable speed to acquire the Mesabi lands, launching a direct and aggressive challenge to Andrew Carnegie's steel empire. This was a strategic pivot that shocked the industrial world as the oil king stepped squarely onto the steel king's turf. John understood that any individual dominating the iron supply would essentially hold total leverage over the nation's building sector. He commenced massive mining operations and immediately launched a campaign of market sabotage. Standard Oil did not merely trade raw materials. They saturated the marketplace with high-grade ore at extremely low prices, functioning as a direct corporate attack. Rockefeller began methodically selling this high-grade resource to Carnegie's fiercest competitors at ruinous rates to destabilize the existing steel hierarchy. This highly calculated economic pressure was intended to render Carnegie's traditional market control obsolete in the modern era. Then came the masterstroke of psychological warfare, the phantom steel mill. John intentionally spread reports that he intended to construct an advanced steel manufacturing facility to compete directly against Carnegie's business. The Steel King, a man of immense pride, suddenly realized his decades of dominance had blinded him to the necessity of owning his raw material supply. Carnegie observed with increasing anxiety as his own mineral reserves depleted, whereas his highly dangerous opponent held absolute control over the largest ore supply in existence. So, it was a total war of attrition over the very bones of the industrial age, a clash of titans that would define the limits of American power. The respective leaders of petroleum and steel were locked in a fierce struggle, both refusing to retreat as financial stakes reached unprecedented levels. John Rockefeller remained a statue of ice, watching as the shadow of his ore empire stretched across the horizon, threatening to swallow everything Carnegie had built. The period of single industry giants was drawing to a close, replaced by the era of mega monopolists. He stood at the peak of this new world, holding the keys to both the light in the windows and the steel in the sky. The child who once hunted wild birds for minimal wages now controlled the market price of materials building modern society. But in this game of giants, the most dangerous move was the one your enemy never saw coming. The struggle for national economic dominance had shifted from physical battlegrounds to the quiet, highly calculated accounts of Rockefeller's financial records. And for Andrew Carnegie, the realization was starting to set in. In a world of predators, the one who owns the ground always wins the war. Even the most dominant business leaders eventually discover that confinement does not require physical barriers. Financial strategies can trap them just as easily. Andrew Carnegie, the undisputed king of the American furnace, finally felt the cold touch of a blade he could not parry. As Carnegie had dedicated decades to establishing his heavy manufacturing business, yet Rockefeller had quietly acquired the essential raw materials beforehand. Realizing his legacy was one bad shipment away from extinction, Carnegie initiated a desperate, high-stakes summit to salvage his pride. The negotiation between Rockefeller's associates and the Scottish industrialist marked the final decline of traditional open business competition. They hammered out a truce that was less of a partnership and more of a total industrial surrender. The final agreement was immense, requiring Carnegie to buy 600,000 tons of Rockefeller's mineral supply annually. The irony was thick enough to choke on, as John, once the victim of railroad rebates, was now the master of the tracks himself. By offering Carnegie private discounts, he transformed his biggest competitor into a dependent buyer of Rockefeller's materials. They signed a formal non-aggression pact, a blood oath where Carnegie stayed away from the mines and John promised never to build a steel mill. Once the announcement reached the financial markets, it triggered an explosive reaction of panic and heavy trading. Investors went into a speculative frenzy, realizing they were witnessing the birth of an unstoppable industrial duopoly. Yet, as the public reacted with shock, another prominent financier stepped forward from Wall Street. J.P. Morgan, the architect of modern money, viewed this truce not as a conclusion, but as the raw material for a greater conquest. Morgan drafted plans for an industrial giant known as U.S. Steel, a conglomerate designed to merge coal, iron, and rail transport into a single dominant force. He wanted a corporation more valuable than Standard Oil, and he expected the world to bow to his vision. When Morgan made his first inquiries, the response he received was completely flat and incredibly unwelcoming. Rockefeller greeted the banker's advances with a calculated, stone-faced indifference that infuriated the man who thought he owned the world. This event was a clash of two incompatible commercial ideologies that would shape the 20th century. Rockefeller was the patient industry builder who viewed order as a divine mandate. Morgan acted as a ruthless investment banker, a daring dealmaker who relied on high leverage and hostile takeovers to win corporate battles. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, the oil king faced a rival who didn't care about the oil. He wanted the soul of the machine itself. Instead of attending himself, John Rockefeller Sr. made his most calculated move by sending his 27-year-old son to handle the intense negotiation. J.P. Morgan, the undisputed center of the financial universe, expected to easily steamroll a rookie heir through pure, unadulterated intimidation. Yet throughout those formal discussions, the younger Rockefeller remained entirely impassive, demonstrating a deep family composure that never wavered under heavy strain. When the banker finally barked, "What is your price?" the young man didn't offer a single number. He simply offered a silent, terrifying void. By maintaining his silence at the start, Junior managed a clever reversal of the power dynamic, making the famous financier look like an eager, pleading buyer. As a stunned Morgan actually retreated from his own office to recalibrate his strategy against an opponent he had tragically and foolishly underestimated. Ultimately, the powerful banker presented an incredible $88 million cash proposal to buy out the entire Mesabi Iron Range. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a blood test that Junior passed with flying colors, proving the legendary iron willpower had been perfectly transmitted. By simply signing the agreement, the Rockefeller mining business launched U.S. Steel, permanently altering the industrial geography of the United States. The boy who once tracked wild turkeys was now grooming the man who would inherit the earth and its vast, black and oily riches. The deal that officially created U.S. Steel seemed less like a simple corporate merger and more like a monumental shift in national economic power. When the dust settled, John Rockefeller stood over a paper storm of $88.5 million in fresh stock. In modern valuation, this represented an amazing $3.1 billion, a sum that eclipses the wealth of today's tech billionaires. J.P. Morgan had successfully absorbed Carnegie's furnaces and Rockefeller's iron mines, birthing the first billion-dollar corporation in human history. John did not have to make any effort. He simply stayed quietly at his estate and watched as his stock holdings surged toward $200 million. It was the ultimate wealth paradox of the Gilded Age. He was accumulating riches faster in his passive retirement than he ever did during the brutal hand-to-hand combat of his youth. But society was progressing, and the soft illumination of kerosene was rapidly giving way to the powerful noise of early automotive engines. Rockefeller performed a masterstroke pivot, transforming Standard Oil from a provider of lamplight into the indispensable fuel source for a motorized world. Gasoline, an unstable byproduct he had previously discarded as useless waste into local waterways, was suddenly the most critical fuel of the 20th century. 1897, the invisible sovereign had quietly stepped away from the daily grind. Yet, he maintained a 30% controlling stake that ensured his word remained law. Although he operated from the background, a formidable new class of political opponents was rising in Washington to dismantle his business. Theodore Roosevelt, the charismatic and loud-talking trustbuster, identified Standard Oil as the ultimate villain for his populist platform. Roosevelt required a prominent corporate villain to target for his re-election bid, and Rockefeller's massive monopoly was the most disliked enterprise nationwide. When early legislation like the Elkins Act failed to curb the machine's power, the public's hunger for corporate blood only grew more ravenous. The decisive attack on his monopoly came not from government investigations, but from the steady work of an investigative typewriter. Enter Ida Tarbell, a woman who carried a professional grudge fueled by the ghosts of her own childhood. Her own father was ruined financially during the Cleveland takeover, giving her a direct, early look at the destructive force of Standard Oil. She was haunted by the memory of her father's partner, a man who chose a self-inflicted bullet to the brain over the humiliation of a Rockefeller buyout. Her extensive series in McClure's magazine thoroughly investigated his business practices, systematically breaking down the privacy Rockefeller had maintained for 30 years. She didn't just report on business. She exposed the bribes, the midnight intimidation, and the systematic destruction of the American small business owner. Next, Tarbell used her most devastating piece of information, exposing the controversial criminal past of Devil Bill Rockefeller. The world was horrified as she dragged John's father's double life into the light, revealing the bigamy, the fake herbal potions, and the dark allegations of sexual assault. Revealing his father's unlawful history completely ruined John's carefully crafted public reputation as a highly devout and moral Baptist. The monk of Manhattan was suddenly revealed as the son of a nomadic con artist, a revelation that shattered his moral authority. Staying true to his quiet personality, John declined to make any public defense, believing that ignoring critics showed greater moral strength. This was a catastrophic tactical error. His stoicism made him appear inhumanly cold and implicitly guilty in the eyes of a judging nation. The change was absolute. The secretive, powerful leader had become the public face of business corruption and absolute corporate greed. As the series concluded, the world's first billionaire found himself the most reviled man in America, hunted by the press and a vengeful president alike. The businessman who dedicated his life to organizing the petroleum trade was now consumed by a firestorm of public outrage. Rockefeller stood alone at the summit, realizing that even all the black gold in the world couldn't buy back a reputation once it had been burned to ash. By the start of the 20th century, the American public was deeply hostile toward giant trusts, and Theodore Roosevelt acted as a skilled political leader, eager to hunt down and dismantle these industrial monopolies. Roosevelt was a master political predator who recognized that the nation's boiling hatred for Standard Oil was the highest octane fuel available for his re-election engine. Abandoning traditional political strategies, he emerged as a champion for ordinary citizens, openly promising to completely dismantle the massive Rockefeller monopoly. The federal government launched a systematic and relentless siege, weaponizing the Bureau of Corporations to tear open the ironclad vault of a 40-year-old secret empire. Government agents dedicated years to discovering hidden financial accounts and secret partnerships, proving John Rockefeller was quietly controlling and restricting the national economy. Standard Oil suddenly found itself fighting a desperate multi-front war, trapped between 21 simultaneous state lawsuits and a massive federal indictment that loomed like a guillotine. The Justice Department utilized the Sherman Antitrust Act as a powerful legal weapon, asserting that his massive conglomerate unlawfully restricted trade and limited economic freedom. What followed was a mountain of infamy, a trial that produced a staggering evidentiary record featuring 444 testifying witnesses from every corner of the industry. Over 12,000 pages of detailed evidence showing harsh business practices were submitted to the court, exposing the unlimited reach of this corrupt monopoly. As the prosecution proved a suffocating 87% market chokehold, exposing how the Titan used his absolute power to gouge consumers on every single gallon of kerosene. The records exposed a hidden network of political corruption, showing how decades of bribery and business spying had undermined the integrity of American democratic institutions. In May of 1911, the Supreme Court finally delivered the historic death sentence, ordering the total and absolute dissolution of the world's greatest monopoly within a mere 6 months. The massive conglomerate was ultimately divided into 34 independent businesses, which eventually became modern energy corporations like Chevron, Mobil, and Exxon. Rivals like Ida Tarbell celebrated a hard-won victory in the streets, believing they had finally slain the dragon of greed and restored the holy spirit of fair competition. Though citizens celebrated the corporate breakup, a major industrial transition was quietly occurring that would soon make petroleum far more valuable than ever before. The dissolution coincided perfectly with the discovery of colossal new oil fields in the untamed lands of Texas, the sun-drenched hills of California, and the distant, mysterious Middle East. International commercial demand transitioned swiftly from traditional domestic kerosene lighting to the high-performance gasoline fuel required by newly developed automobile engines. As gasoline, the very waste product John had once dumped into the Cuyahoga River as useless trash, was suddenly the most valuable substance on the face of the planet. Once the 34 newly formed enterprises went public, active trading by investors caused the total stock value to nearly triple its previous consolidated worth. Here lay the ultimate capitalist paradox of the Gilded Age. John Rockefeller, holding a 25% stake in every new entity, watched his personal wealth explode into the stratosphere. Following his most severe legal penalty, the businessman's personal fortune increased to levels previously unmatched in the recorded history of global finance. He stood at the absolute peak of human history as the world's first billionaire, proven to be more powerful in legal defeat than his enemies were in political victory. Rockefeller surrendered his official monopoly only to find that his personal share of the world's vast petroleum wealth remained entirely secure from government intervention. He left behind a legacy of wealth that would haunt and shape the next century, proving that true power never really disappears. It only changes its name and reorganizes its ledger. The poor youth who once hunted wild birds had managed to secure control over the future of global energy, retaining this immense influence until his final days. Standing alone at the finish line, he remained a ghost in the machine, a man who had won the war for the American soul by simply waiting for the world to catch up to his vision. He was an industrial force that survived the government's trap, leaving critics to wonder if his monopoly was truly dismantled or simply disguised under new names. John D. Rockefeller didn't see his transition from corporate predator to global savior as a change of heart, but as a strategic change of theater. He considered himself a designated steward of God, selected by fate to manage immense financial resources for the eventual benefit of global society. The cold, calculating logic that had once built Standard Oil was now redirected toward a mission of strategic distribution. This charity was not a late attempt to ease a guilty conscience, but rather the continuation of childhood habits taught by his mother's strict religion. Even in the destitute dirt of his childhood, when money was a ghost and Devil Bill was a vanishing shadow, he meticulously carved out 10% of every single dollar for the Baptist Church. Giving 10% was his initial promise to God, a practice he kept even as his total wealth approached $1 billion. While the public labeled his massive donations as cynical PR stunts to hide his monopoly's sins, John operated a vast secret network of anonymous giving that sought no credit and no applause. Odd. He remained a figure who favored quiet anonymity, whether he was eliminating a business rival or financing medical research. In 1913, he institutionalized this science of giving with the birth of the Rockefeller Foundation. Collaborating with the highly capable Frederick Gates and his son, John Jr., he organized his charitable giving like an efficient corporate operation. They didn't just give to the poor, they invested in the future of the human species through clinical, data-driven research that moved the needle of history. Rockefeller donated $540 million of his own wealth, establishing a charitable trust that has given away billions over decades. He launched a relentless medical crusade that targeted the invisible microscopic enemies of the human race with the same fury he once targeted rival refiners. His research centers developed medical breakthroughs that successfully eliminated hookworm, meningitis, and malaria across Western nations. Millions of lives were saved by a man whose name they were taught to whisper with fear and hatred in the streets. As he dedicated his immense wealth to helping the impoverished American South, establishing the essential groundwork for modern public healthcare systems throughout the region. Rockefeller became the master architect of knowledge, founding world-class research institutions and universities like Chicago that moved humanity forward by entire decades. Nevertheless, historians continue to debate a difficult question: how to balance his exceptional charitable contributions with his history of ruthless corporate destruction. He was a dualism in a silk hat, the secretive, corrupt monopolist of the Gilded Age and the visionary savior of the modern medical age. People found it difficult to comprehend the monk of Manhattan, who remained focused on quiet accounts and religious devotion, while angry crowds protested outside his private residence. His 97-year odyssey finally came to a quiet, peaceful close in 1937, long after he had outlived every rival and every critic who had tried to bury him in scandal. He observed the emergence of the modern society he had influenced, transitioning from the dim glow of kerosene lamps to the loud power of gasoline-driven engines. His son, John Jr., offered the final haunting verdict, stating that despite the firestorms of public controversy, there was only ever one John D. Rockefeller. The immense fortune he accumulated using ruthless corporate strategies ultimately funded significant advancements in global development and medicine. He proved that power, when handled with iron willpower, could be both a lethal poison and a miraculous cure. Looking back from our present era, we can easily trace his enduring influence stretching throughout modern healthcare systems and scientific research facilities. The boy who once tracked wild turkeys in the woods ended his journey as the architect of the 20th century. His impact exceeds mere financial wealth, serving as a prominent example of how individual drive can reshape the course of human history. The octopus may have been dismantled by the law, but its influence is the very air we breathe and the medicine we take today. Ultimately, John Rockefeller controlled far more than the oil industry. He shaped the future. He remains the most complex ghost in the history of capital, a man who lit the world and then taught it how to survive.